It's interesting, isn't it, that depending on one's personal situation, which bit of what was said yesterday affects you and which bit will help you. But Rishi Sunak has never claimed that he could save every job. He's never said that there aren't going to be hard times ahead. And in fact, the borrowing is exponential, 350 billion. And even Tory MPs on the backbenches are very nervous about that. What more is it that Labour would be doing right now that he isn't?
Well, I do think that the Chancellor needs to take a more targeted approach. I mean, we were very pleased to see in the statement some measures that we've been calling for. In particular, we've said there needs to be much more support for young unemployed people based on the Welsh Government's model for this and the Future Jobs Fund that the Labour government introduced 10 years ago. We now will have an approach like that. That's a very positive thing. I'm pleased that he's brought that forward. But, you know, more needs to be done to prevent people becoming unemployed in the first place. And I was really concerned yesterday that the Chancellor isn't shifting away from his approach, which pretty much is treating most sectors similarly. You know, it's treating them the same for withdrawal of the job retention scheme, withdrawal of the self-employed scheme. That's not sensible when we're in the middle of a crisis that is particularly concentrated on different sectors. So I'm still hoping that he might shift away from that one-size-fits-all approach. I think if he doesn't, we could see unemployment rising even higher.
What would you be doing? Which sectors is it particularly that concern you? And what is Labour's solution? I think the problem through all of this, of course, for an opposition is that you have to come up with some viable alternatives to make your argument for calling for more sound reasonable. And even we had Kevin Maguire on, who's obviously from the Daily Mirror. And he even himself admitted that Labour are struggling to come up with any alternatives to a Chancellor who himself, in even a Labour government, would look generous.
Well, it's not just about generosity. It's about whether the money is targeted in the right direction.
Go on, so give us some details then. Give us some details of what you want to do.
I was just about to come on to them with respect. So I was just going to say, you know, the Chancellor yesterday announced a bonus for all employers who've had employees who have been furloughed, who've been on that job retention scheme. Now, we don't know exactly how it's going to work, but if it is applied for literally every employee who has had a spell within the job retention scheme, you know, that bonus, I mean, I'm not going to criticise it because at least some support is being provided there, but that bonus will be going out to every different sector. You know, that could cost potentially up to £9 billion. Now, having a more targeted approach to the job retention scheme and the self-employed scheme in the first place would be likely to keep people out of unemployment and to do so in a cost-effective way. You know, we see lots of other countries adopting these kinds of approaches focused on especially struggling sectors. So it is about where that funding is targeted. And, you know, the big challenge we've got now in the UK is we've got very small numbers of vacancies being created. So yes, it's right that the Chancellor is doing more to help those who've become unemployed, but he needs to be focusing on preventing people becoming unemployed in the first place. That's not just really bad for those people who fall out of employment individually, it's bad for our country because they tend to earn much less even when they get back into work. That erodes tax take, it obviously erodes our economic capacity as well.
Yeah, there will be huge concerns this morning because, as you say, the government needs to do as much as it possibly can to keep the economy going or reboot the economy, retain those jobs, keep people employed, allow them to keep paying their rent and pay their mortgages. However, there will be huge fears as to how this is all going to get paid for down the line. As Rambis said, £350 billion and counting is what's been borrowed. We're borrowing over 100% of GDP for the first time in over half a century. I mean, the amount of money that the government is trying to put into the economy, to put into everybody, is enormous. But it's going to have to be paid for at some point. How, if Labour win the next election, are you going to cover that cost and cover that debt, Annalise Dodds? Because that is a real concern, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, I would say, first of all, that we shouldn't be spending money wastefully. We've seen billions and billions of pounds going into outsourced contracts for Test Track and Isolate, for example, and we still don't have that system working properly, and that's a big drag on our recovery. But when it comes to then how whatever debt is accrued will be dealt with. You know, the most effective way to do that is to grow the economy. When you grow the economy, more people are paying tax, and provided there's still this low interest rate environment, that will erode the value, it'll erode the magnitude of the deficits. And that's what government should be focused on now. That's what governments in other countries are focused on. That's what they need to be doing.
Yeah. You've said in the past that it's sort of those with the broadest shoulders are going to have to be paying the most. Is there an expectation that the highest earners are going to have their tax increased? So only earning over £80,000 could get up to 50% in tax on that. Is that how you see this going, that it's going to be thrown particularly at the high earners?
Well, look, if government doesn't manage to grow the economy, and if we see a change in the interest rate environment that makes it harder to tolerate the current levels of debt, then there would need to be a response to that. Now, there's been some suggestions from the Conservatives that they might want to increase income tax or VAT or national insurance across the board, across the population. That would not be sensible in a situation where we've seen, you know, constrained living standards for 10 years for low and middle income people. You know, we should have a fairer allocation if we get to that point. But ultimately, as I said, what government should be focused on now is really trying to push up that demand, you know, getting those public health measures right so people have confidence to be going into businesses.
Well, we're seeing what the government are trying to do. Annalise Dodds, we're interested in what you would do if you were Chancellor, as a Labour Chancellor, the specific detail, if possible, if you can give us some of that. What is it that you would do to sort of combat some of these fears?
Well, as I just said, first of all, focusing on growing the size of the economy. That is what is most important now.
And how do you do that
while
then?
We're still in that low. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to prevent those additional major waves of unemployment. Mass unemployment is an enormous drag.
So what do you do, for example, in the airline industry? You know, obviously they've got thousands and thousands of jobs going for good, it seems. What do you do? Bail out the airline industry? What would Labour be doing now?
Well, we've repeatedly said that government needs to work through a strategy with the industry, with trade unions. Now, that won't be a strategy where airlines stay exactly as they are now. We can't continue with that. There will be a structural reduction in demand. Also, there will need to be change because of the climate crisis. But the problem is now we have really chaotic change. We have those major job losses and the different airlines fighting it out amongst themselves, potentially different regional airports going bust. Government needs to come up with a strategy on that. That involves, and we've urged them to do this, we're trying to be a constructive opposition. We've said to them they need to be looking at what the different scenarios are for the future of aviation. They need to be working with those different stakeholders. And yes, there will need to be change. As I said, there is a reduction in demand. There is a climate crisis, but we can't have this kind of destructive change that's leaching, particularly a lot of highly skilled engineering jobs, out of our economy.
And what, as Ben had just said to Gemma, is it what marks do you give him out of 10 for his budget yesterday, in one word?
Well, look, I'm not going to criticise the Chancellor unnecessarily. I just want him to do the right thing. So I'm not going to be nasty to him. I didn't support his decision to continue with this one-size-fits-all approach.
We wanted a number. Never mind. Thank you, Annalise.